The Zorvax Empire had conquered hundreds of planets without struggle. Their warships were the most powerful in the galaxy, their soldiers trained to crush resistance before it even started. When they set their eyes on Earth, they expected another swift victory just like always. Supreme Overlord Exurin watched from his flagship as the fleet entered Earth's orbit, already preparing the declaration of conquest. The plan was simple: land, demand surrender, and if the humans resisted, annihilate their defenses. But something strange happened the moment they tried to begin the invasion. Their landing request was denied. The warships sent a transmission demanding an immediate surrender, but instead of fear or defiance, the humans responded with a request for proper documentation. Confused, Exurin ordered his communications officer to rescind the war declaration, but the reply was the same. Your request for planetary takeover has been denied due to failure to submit Form 12 Alpha for territorial acquisition. Please consult Earth's United Government for invasion authorization. The Overlord stared at the screen, unable to believe what he was hearing. Never before had a planet demanded paperwork before surrendering. This had to be a joke. Annoyed, Exurin sent a squad of elite soldiers to the surface to take control of the nearest human city. They landed in a massive metropolis called New London, weapons ready, expecting a fierce battle. Instead, they were met by a group of officials holding clipboards. "I'm sorry," one of them said, adjusting his glasses, "but you can't just march in and take over. There are zoning laws and territorial acquisition protocols. Do you have a proper permit for this occupation?" The squad leader growled, raising his plasma rifle. "We do not need permission. We are the Zorvax Empire. We take what we want." But the officials did not even flinch. One of them calmly scribbled something on his clipboard. "I see. That will be a violation of Planetary Code 442B, unauthorized military activity in a civilian zone. You will need to cease operations immediately and schedule a review hearing before proceeding with your invasion." The soldiers stood frozen, unsure what to do. Never had they encountered enemies who fought with laws instead of weapons. Frustrated, they tried to push forward, but before they could take another step, loud sirens blared across the city. Moments later, police vehicles surrounded them, flashing red and blue lights as more humans in uniforms approached. "All right, gentlemen, you're under arrest for unlawful entry, carrying unlicensed weaponry, and violation of multiple municipal codes," an officer said, handcuffs in hand. Surin was furious when he heard what had happened. His elite warriors, the pride of the Zorvax Empire, had been arrested by human law enforcement. This was absurd! He sent an immediate demand for their release, but Earth's government responded with a message stating that the soldiers had the right to legal representation and that their trials would be scheduled in accordance with the judicial calendar. The Overlord nearly crushed his throne in rage. No planet had ever resisted in such a bizarre way. He needed a new approach. He ordered a full-scale military assault, deploying battle cruisers and ground troops in multiple locations across the planet. But as soon as his forces began their operations, they were met with an overwhelming wave of bureaucracy. The warships were halted in orbit, receiving messages about restricted airspace violations and demands for customs inspections. His ground troops were stuck at landing sites, unable to proceed without environmental impact assessments. Even the Empire's planetary headquarters on Earth was shut down by health and safety inspectors, who cited a lack of fire exits and non-compliance with local building codes. Every attempt to wage war was blocked by endless legal obstacles, leaving his mighty invasion force completely paralyzed. Days turned into weeks, and the situation only got worse. The Zorvax Empire found itself entangled in a nightmare of legal warfare. Every aggressive move they made was met with lawsuits, counterclaims, and regulatory penalties. Their military bases were slapped with fines for improper land use. Their officers were sued for workplace harassment when they yelled at their subordinates. Their war machines were impounded for failing to meet safety standards. Even their attempts to recruit human collaborators were blocked by strict labor laws. The Empire's top strategists spent more time filling out paperwork than planning attack. Meanwhile, Earth's legal experts worked tirelessly to exploit every loophole, dragging the Zorvax into endless bureaucratic battles. The overlord himself was summoned to court for attempted planetary conquest without proper licensing, a charge that carried severe financial penalties. As the invasion dragged on without a single shot being fired, Siren realized that his forces were crumbling, not from combat, but from exhaustion. His best officers were buried in legal documents. His soldiers were stuck in endless legal disputes, and his warships were grounded by human regulations. The once feared Zorvax Empire was now drowning in paperwork. Desperate, he tried to negotiate a way out, but Earth's leaders only offered one option: complete surrender under human bureaucratic terms. Defeated, Exuran had no choice but to comply. The great empire, which had conquered countless worlds, had been brought to its knees not by military strength, but by the relentless power of human bureaucracy. As he signed the final surrender document, which was 700 pages long and required a dozen notarized copies, he muttered under his breath, "Perhaps war was easier after all." Supreme Overlord Exuran sat on his command throne, staring at the holographic reports piling up before him. This was not how an invasion was supposed to go. His fleet, the pride of the Zorvax Empire, was stuck in Earth's orbit, unable to fire a single shot. His elite soldiers, trained to crush resistance, were tangled in a web of legal restrictions. Every attempt to advance had been met with another layer of human bureaucracy, an invisible force more powerful than any weapon he had ever encountered. He clenched his fists in frustration. This was supposed to be an easy conquest. Instead, his war machine had been reduced to a struggling, confused mess, drowning in regulations, permits, and legal notices. The humans had turned war into a bureaucratic nightmare, and there was no way out. Zurin's communications officer hesitated before speaking. "Overlord, our ground forces attempted another landing, but they were stopped before even leaving their ships. The humans claim we are violating atmospheric entry laws. They are demanding we file Form 57 before proceeding." Surin's claws tightened around the armrest of his throne. "And what, exactly, is Form 57? The officer swallowed nervously. "It is an environmental impact assessment for large-scale planetary entry. They claim our troop dropships could disrupt local wildlife and air quality." The Overlord let out a guttural snarl. "This is absurd. We are conquerors, not tourists. We do not need permission to land." But the humans did not care about his authority. Without the correct paperwork, the invasion could not proceed. The warships remained locked in orbit, and his soldiers remained stranded in their landing craft, awaiting clearance that would never come. As if that wasn't enough, new problems kept emerging. The Zorvax flagship, Doombringer, received a distress call from one of its frigates. "This is Commander Vrax of the Iron Fist." The transmission came in, filled with panic. "We are being detained by human authorities. They claim we have been operating without proper licensing for our weapons." Surin's eyes widened in disbelief. "Licensing? Our weapons are the most advanced in the galaxy. What nonsense is this?" The human official on the other end of the communication remained calm. "Sir, your weapon systems exceed the allowed energy output for orbital operations in civilian zones. According to Earth's defense treaty, all foreign military assets must be inspected for compliance. Your weapons are unauthorized for deployment until further notice." Zurin nearly smashed the console in rage. His warships, capable of turning planets to ash, were being grounded because of human safety regulations. This was beyond humiliation. The humans showed no signs of relenting. Every aspect of the Zorvax operation was buried in legal requirements. Ground forces attempting to seize government buildings were stopped, not by armed resistance, but by human lawyers citing property rights violations. Fleet commanders were summoned to human courts over accusations of reckless navigation in Earth's orbit. Even the food rations aboard Zorvax ships were flagged by human health inspectors for not meeting nutritional standards. Zurin was losing control of the situation, and his empire's greatest military minds had no solutions. Every time they tried to bypass a regulation, more fines, penalties, and legal threats followed. The war effort had completely stalled. Weeks passed, and the situation only worsened. The Zorvax Empire found itself spending more resources fighting legal battles than waging actual war. human officials flooded their communication lines with endless, ground to a halt, trapped in the most suffocating system they had ever encountered. The Supreme Overlord, once feared across the galaxy, now found himself buried in paperwork. As frustration reached its peak, Xirin attempted to negotiate directly with Earth's leaders. He demanded that they recognize his empire's authority and submit to his rule without further resistance. The humans responded with another form. "You are requesting planetary control." The message read, "Please submit an official proposal along with a detailed 5-year governance plan, proof of sustainable resource management, and assurances of human rights protections for all citizens." Xirin's vision blurred with rage. Never had he faced such humiliation. But deep down, he knew the truth he had lost. The war was over before it had even begun. Not because his army was weak, but because the humans had built a system so complex, so frustrating, that no conqueror could ever navigate it. The mighty Zorvax Empire, undefeated for centuries, had been brought to its knees by nothing more than bureaucracy. As he stared at the latest request for compliance, a sinking realization settled over him. The Zorvax Empire could break worlds, but it could not break Earth's paperwork. Defeated, he slumped into his throne, exhausted, as the endless sea of red tape closed in around him. Supreme Overlord Xirin had never known defeat. His Zorvax Empire had crushed hundreds of civilizations, their conquests swift and brutal. Planets fell within days, and enemy forces were eliminated before they could mount a proper resistance. That was the way war had always worked until they reached Earth. The invasion had been planned with precision. Warships hovered over major cities, ground forces prepared to descend, and surrender demands were transmitted. But the humans did not react with fear or defiance. Instead, they responded with legal objections. Xirin's fleet received an official notice from Earth's Planetary Council, informing them that their actions violated multiple international treaties. The Overlord had ignored it at first, seeing it as a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. He ordered an immediate assault. That was when the real nightmare began. Before his forces could land, Earth's governments issued cease and desist orders. His warships were flagged for operating in restricted airspace without approval, and his soldiers were warned that any unauthorized military activity would result in criminal charges. The invasion, which should have been over in hours, was now entangled in an endless legal battle, and Xirin had no idea how to fight an enemy that used laws instead of weapons. Frustrated, Xirin dispatched his generals to secure key locations, but every attempt to advance was blocked by a different bureaucratic restriction. His troops were stopped at the borders of human territories because they had not obtained the proper entry visas. His war machines were impounded due to safety violations, as they lacked certification for operation in urban areas. The Zorvax fleet's communication systems were even jammed by human regulators, who claimed they interfered with civilian broadcasting frequencies. Every strategy the Overlord attempted was countered, not with force, but with paperwork. When he demanded an explanation, Earth's representatives calmly informed him that all planetary conflicts had to be resolved through diplomatic channels in accordance with the Galactic Conflict Resolution Act. If the Zorvax Empire wanted control of Earth, they would need to file the necessary petitions, undergo a review process, and attend a series of hearings before their request could even be considered. Xirin could hardly believe what he was hearing. He was the leader of the most feared empire in the galaxy, yet he was being forced to participate in a legal system so convoluted that even his best strategists struggled to navigate it. Desperate to break free from this legal trap, Xirin ordered his forces to attack regardless of the restrictions. But before the first shot could be fired, Earth's authorities responded with countermeasures. Human courts issued injunctions against the Zorvax military, making any act of aggression a violation of planetary law. News broadcasts across Earth framed the invasion as a corporate dispute rather than a war, painting the Zorvax as a rogue organization that refused to comply with international regulations. The humans flooded the Empire with lawsuits, each one designed to delay, obstruct, and overwhelm their ability to act. The Supreme Overlord, who had once led fleets to victory with a single command, now found himself buried in legal documents, struggling to understand the ever-growing list of regulations binding his forces. Each day brought new complications. His officers were summoned to human courts, charged with crimes. Weeks passed, and the situation only worsened. The Zorvax invasion fleet, once the most formidable force in the galaxy, had been reduced to nothing more than a collection of defendants in an interstellar court system. Zurin's best warriors spent their days filling out forms, attending hearings, and trying to comply with human regulatory demands. Morale plummeted as soldiers, trained for combat, found themselves debating legal statutes instead of fighting battles. Some even deserted, unable to withstand the slow, crushing force of Earth's legal warfare. The Overlord watched in helpless fury as his empire's resources were drained by endless fines, fees, and settlements. His once mighty warships were repossessed due to outstanding debts, and his ground forces were stuck in legal limbo, unable to operate without proper authorization. It was no longer a war, it was an administrative disaster. Realizing that victory was impossible, Zurin made one final attempt to negotiate. He reached out to Earth's leaders, offering a surrender on his own terms. But the humans refused to accept until all outstanding legal matters were resolved. The Overlord was forced to sign a series of humiliating agreements, acknowledging the Zorvax Empire's failure to comply with intergalactic law. When the final document was signed, Zurin slumped into his throne, utterly defeated. He had conquered countless worlds through war, but Earth had crushed him without firing a single shot. As his battered fleet withdrew from the planet, drowning in red tape and legal obligations, Zurin finally understood the terrifying power of human bureaucracy. It was a force no army could overcome, a nightmare of legal warfare from which there was no escape. Supreme Overlord Zurin sat in the grand war chamber of the Zorvax High Command, staring at the reports flashing across the holographic screens. Every number, every projection, told the same horrifying story: his empire was crumbling. The Zorvax Empire, once the most feared force in the galaxy, was on the brink of total economic collapse. It had started with the failed invasion of Earth. What should have been a simple conquest had turned into a bureaucratic nightmare. His warships had been immobilized by human regulations. His armies had been entangled in endless legal disputes, and the resources poured into the invasion had yielded nothing but debt. But the worst was yet to come. The humans had retaliated, in a way no empire had ever anticipated, not with weapons, but with economic warfare. At first, the Overlord had dismissed the humans' financial influence as insignificant. The Zorvax Empire had conquered countless civilizations, plundering their resources and forcing them into servitude. What could Earth possibly do to challenge such a vast and powerful economic system? But the humans had a different kind of power, one that did not rely on brute force, but on markets, trade, and financial manipulation. They had turned their economic influence into a weapon, and the Zorvax economy was its target. It began subtly. Human financial institutions blacklisted the Zorvax Empire, cutting it off from the intergalactic banking networks. Zorvax credits, once valued as a universal currency, plummeted overnight. Trade agreements with neutral planets were severed as human diplomats pressured their allies to impose sanctions. Within weeks, supply chains collapsed. The Empire's fuel reserves dwindled as suppliers refused to accept devalued Zorvax currency. Essential goods became scarce, and prices soared beyond control. What had once been a thriving, self-sufficient empire was now struggling to maintain even basic operations. Zurin refused to accept defeat. He ordered his financial advisors to stabilize the economy, but every strategy they proposed was countered by human economic warfare. The humans flooded the galactic markets with cheaper alternatives to Zorvax exports, destroying entire industries overnight. Food shortages spread as agricultural imports were blocked, forcing citizens to ration supplies. Factories shut down as raw materials became impossible to acquire. The Empire's once mighty war machine ground to a halt, not because of enemy firepower, but because there was no fuel, no supplies, and no money to sustain it. Desperation grew among the ruling elite. The Overlord's governors and commanders, once loyal and unwavering, began to panic. They demanded answers, solutions, a way out of the crisis. But there was none. Every attempt to rebuild was met with new economic pressure. Human-controlled banks devalued Zorvax assets, turning the Empire's wealth into worthless numbers on a screen. Civil unrest exploded across Zorvak's territories as citizens, unable to afford food or basic necessities, rioted against their leaders. Planets that had once pledged undying loyalty now threatened. Elsewhere, the Empire's enemies, sensing weakness, launched attacks on its borders, seizing territory without resistance. Surin watched helplessly as the empire he had built over centuries collapsed in mere months. The final blow came when the Empire's core financial systems fell into complete ruin. With no economy to support it, the Zorvak's government could no longer function. Essential services shut down. Communications failed. Entire planets fell into chaos, ruled not by imperial law, but by desperate warlords fighting over the last remaining resources. Zurin's palace, once a symbol of ultimate power, became an empty fortress, surrounded by a starving, angry population demanding answers he could not give. The overlord sat in silence, staring at the ruins of his empire. He had always believed that war decided the fate of civilizations, that strength, strategy, and force were the ultimate measures of power. But the humans had shown him a different truth. They had not needed fleets or armies to bring him to his knees. They had destroyed him with numbers, policies, and economic influence. The Zorvak's empire had fallen, not in battle, but in financial ruin. As his last remaining advisors fled, as his empire disintegrated around him, Zurin finally understood the depth of his failure. He had underestimated the true power of the humans. And now, there was nothing left to save. Supreme Overlord Xuron sat alone in the cold silence of his once magnificent war chamber. The great banners of the Zorvak's empire, which had once symbolized strength and domination, now hung in tatters. The grand displays that had once shown the vast territories under his rule were now filled with distress signals, riots, and planetary defections. His empire, his life's work, was crumbling before his eyes, and for the first time in his long reign, he had no solution. The invasion of Earth had seemed like a trivial conquest at first, a simple campaign to expand his dominion. But the humans had not fought like any other species. They had not relied on warships or brute force alone. Instead, they had turned his own empire's strength against itself, strangling it with laws, bureaucracy, and economic warfare. It had been a slow and agonizing defeat, one that he had refused to acknowledge until it was too late. The first signs of collapse had come when the empire's treasury, once overflowing with wealth from conquered worlds, had been rendered useless. Human economic tactics had destroyed the value of Zorvak's currency, making trade impossible. Then came the sanctions, cutting off essential supplies. Entire fleets had been grounded as fuel reserves dried up, and planetary governors had struggled to maintain control as food shortages triggered widespread revolts. His once loyal military commanders had pleaded for resources that no longer existed, their fleets unable to move, their soldiers unpaid. The mighty war machine of the Zorvak's empire had been brought to a standstill not by superior firepower, but by relentless human strategy. The overlord had resisted for as long as he could, refusing to bow to what he saw as a lesser species. He had ordered desperate counterattacks, but his forces had been too weak, too scattered, too demoralized to succeed. Every move he made had been anticipated and countered by the humans. His final attempt at war had ended in disaster. The remnants of his fleet, once the terror of the galaxy, had been surrounded and forced into retreat, their ships falling apart due to lack of maintenance and supplies. His warriors, once feared across the stars, had been reduced to scavengers, fleeing from battles they would have once dominated. Now the end was here. The human diplomats had sent their final message, a formal demand for surrender. There would be no negotiation, no terms dictated by the Zorvaks. The once mighty empire would be dismantled, its territories freed, its rulers held accountable. Zurin had no illusions about his fate. Surrender meant humiliation, trial, and likely execution. But there was no other choice. His people were starving, his armies were broken, and his rule had become meaningless. There was nothing left to fight for. As he sat in the empty chamber, staring at the transmission, awaiting his response, he felt the weight of his failure pressing down on him. He had believed that strength alone determined the fate of empires. He had thought that war was won with weapons and conquests. But the humans had shown him the truth. Power was not just about firepower, but about strategy, resilience, and the ability to turn an enemy's strength into their greatest weakness. They had not just defeated the Zorvax Empire. They had dismantled it piece by piece, until there was nothing left but a broken ruler sitting in the ruins of his own arrogance. With a deep breath, he reached out and pressed the final command. The message was sent. The war was over. The Zorvax Empire had surrendered. And as Exerin closed his eyes, he knew that